This is the story of Adolf Hitler, the man who rose from obscurity after World War I and led Germany into history's deadliest war. Through speeches and political turmoil, he rose from a fringe agitator to Germany's chancellor. He built a regime that promised renewal, but prepared for expansion and control. In 1939, his decisions ignited World War II, and the world would never be the same. His empire ended in ruins, leaving the world with lessons never to be forgotten. He promised greatness. He delivered ashes. This is not the story of a hero. It's the story of how hate became a nation's heartbeat. Before he ruled millions, he was just a failed artist. Before he destroyed nations, he painted flowers. He applied to the Academy of Fine Arts twice and was rejected twice. Failure planted the first seed of resentment. Homeless, hungry, forgotten, he slept in shelters, drew postcards for coins, and fed on bitterness. When the guns of 1914 roared, he found purpose in chaos and obedience in death. He was wounded once, but the deeper wound was invisible. Germany's defeat, the Treaty of Versailles, for some, peace, for others, betrayal. For him, it was humiliation, carved into his soul. While others sought recovery, he sought someone to blame. And the poison of anti-Semitism found fertile ground. In beer halls of Munich, his words became fire, his anger contagious, his voice a weapon. In 1919, he joined a tiny nationalist group. Within years, it would become a storm and drown democracy itself. Inflation erased savings overnight. Veterans begged on the streets. The Republic was young, fragile, and desperate for order. Desperate minds are fertile soil. Words became weapons. Lies, currency. In 1923, a mob marched through Munich, dreaming of a coup. The streets answered with bullets. In silence of a cell, he dictated his beliefs. The blueprint for tyranny, masquerading as salvation. The Great Depression struck like a plague. Millions jobless, millions angry, looking for someone to blame. Technology gave voice to charisma. For the first time in history, a demagogue could speak to every home at once. He didn't seize power by force. He was voted into it. When the Reichstag burned, fear finished what votes began. Democracy died to the sound of applause. Judges, teachers, soldiers swore not to the Constitution, but to one man. Books burned, voices vanished, children marched. A nation was forged into obedience. He called it renewal. The people called it salvation, but it was only control, dressed as destiny. History was rewritten, facts bent to faith. Every lie repeated until it became sacred. They began with children. Loyalty taught before reason. Songs before thought. When knowledge threatens power, power burns knowledge. Journalists disappeared. Painters censored. Poets silenced. In a nation without truth, art becomes rebellion. Neighbors reported neighbors. Fear became the language of survival. They called them re-education zones. Behind barbed wire, hope froze to silence. Even faith was conscripted. The sermons changed. God now spoke with a political accent. They smiled in public, whispered in private, and dreamed of freedom only in silence. Every tyranny fears one thing: the voice that says no. Truth moved underground. Messages passed by hand, printed by night. Every phone, every letter, every glance watched. The cage was invisible because it was everywhere. When control is complete, conquest begins. Millions marched, not for freedom, but for fear of being the only one who didn't. Outside, nations hesitated. Inside, the clock of disaster was already ticking. It began with borders. It ended with ruins. One nation's dream of destiny set half the planet on fire. Under banners of order, towns were taken. Civilians watched armies march through their streets. Again, even in darkness, some refused to bow. Teachers, farmers, poets, ordinary souls who chose defiance over silence. Empires rose to stop the blaze. Alliances forged in fear now fought in fire. They paid the highest price, not with weapons, but with hunger, loss, and fear. The machine that conquered began to collapse, crushed by the weight of its own lies. Fire answered fire. Entire cities vanished overnight. Inside the capital, the illusion cracked. The leader's voice trembled. The empire imploded. When the gates opened, the world saw what denial had hidden. The world gathered not for vengeance, but for memory, so that this machinery of hate would never rise again. The banners fell, but scars remained. On cities, on minds, on generations. Every tyranny begins with words. Every freedom depends on remembering them. Stones can't cry, but they remind. Names carved in silence speak louder than banners ever did. The question never dies. Would we see it coming again? In the end, humanity survives not by power, but by memory, empathy, and the courage to question. When the guns stopped, the world didn't cheer. It whispered. Victory had no joy, only exhaustion. Every nation looked into its own mirror and saw the cost of blindness. Cities rose from ashes, but the hardest reconstruction was of conscience. Millions without homes, borders redrawn by grief. The war had ended, but displacement had only begun. They spoke so the world could never say, "We didn't know." In 1948, the world wrote new laws, not for governments, but for humanity itself. Born amid ruins, they learned that peace is never inherited. It's built. Museums rose, not to glorify pain, but to remind what silence can cost. Time blurred faces, but not lessons. Every generation must choose between comfort and conscience. New tools, same temptations. To follow blindly, to fear loudly, to forget quietly. Tyranny does not begin with violence. It begins when truth becomes inconvenient. We stand again at crossroads between fear and empathy, between noise and understanding. History's light is not gentle, but it shows the way forward. Evil sleeps lightly. Freedom demands that we never do. The past does not ask us to hate, only to remember.